What's up, Shred Sexies? Welcome back. Death to the Fingers. We're getting into the guitar course here. Basically, the lesson on choices, and precedes basically all the music writing stuff because trust me, this part becomes very, very important because you get into the writing process and you write and you realize that music is vast and it's easy to get lost. And what happens is your song ends up being a failure or you don't quite get out of the formation stage, which can be detrimental. So this is to avoid this basic vortex, right? So essentially, I remember a long time ago, I was, trying to watch a movie on Netflix. I was doing it through the Xbox. Man, that was a long time ago. Anyways, I'm like 60 movies in, I'm doom scrolling, right? And I'm just like, if I'd come here and I already knew what I wanted to watch, I'd be watching it right now. Or I'm like, narrow it down. I want an action movie that's got Western elements to it. I'd be watching that one now too, because it would have taken from 200 movies down to like 10. Be like, all right, here it is, Young Guns, done, or whatever, Tombstone. So that right there actually taught me something very important about preparing myself mentally before I just take on these activities. Otherwise, you just end up spending more time mindlessly scrolling through something, wasting time instead of actually doing the activity you wanted to. And although in this case, it was just like, well, you're just going to sit there and watch TV anyways. That's not exactly rocket science or anything like that. The fact of the matter is I actually recognized it in terms of playing guitar. I was like, a lot of times you're like, oh, I'll just practice some scales today. And that morphed into, I'm going to use the dominant 7 chord as the underlying harmonic structure I'm playing over. And then I'm going to work with the melodic minor modes and the diatonic major modes. And I'm going to put those two scale systems together in some way to try to come up with a new lick. And I might throw a dominant 7 arpeggio in there once in a while too. Who knows? Now, one is I'm going to practice scales. That's just shotgun scatter all over the place. The other one is targeted practice sessions where you're like, I'm going to use these 3 elements in conjunction with each other to basically achieve a result. It's a math problem that you have no idea what the outcome should be, and you're required to figure it out. So you push play on the backing track. It's like a D7 chord or a vamp. You're like, okay, I'm going to play D mixolydian over top of it as the 3 notes per string stuff. I need to choose one of the 5 melodic minor scales and play it somewhere, either a half step or a whole step down or up from where the mixolydian position is to figure out where and which scale I should be using. And then you just sit there for 10 minutes until you figure it out. And then you're like, that sounds great. Or it might even be superimposed over top of it. So you have quite a few choices there. That's targeted practice that develops actual skill because it gives you the real world guitar skills you need to be a competent musician. And there's no substitute for it. You can either seek it out in a book if you want. That doesn't really work out so great because usually it's that person's interpretation. Instead, you're supposed to take the concept and be like, apply it to your own playing and your own understanding of music so that you can internalize it your own way. That's another big one that people just skip right over. They try to ingest other people's ideas instead of, break them apart and be like, well, that makes sense to me, but this part over here doesn't make sense. And 5 years later, after you've thought about it, you're like, okay, well, this makes sense to me. And now I see how those two things relate. That's where I was getting it wrong. Because this person didn't really explain this one missing element to how this worked. And now that I've figured it out for myself, I actually understand why they made that statement. And now these two pieces of information correspond. Again, the choice there was it's not to just mindlessly consume some video's information to be like, play this lick. This was another one. The magic is in the mid-range. I'd watched hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tutorials, if you will, on mixing music. And that sentence right there probably made the biggest impact in all of my mixes because I started to focus in certain instances on the guitars and the bass on really developing the mid-range And as soon as I did, the mixes were fundamentally awesome. It wasn't a mix trick. It wasn't me doing a verbatim series of actions that somebody shows me on the internet. It was Colt Caparoon. That's, if you know who that is. Just being like, the magic's in the mid-range. That some famous mixer told me that. And then he said it on the internet, and then I heard it, and then like a year later, it actually made sense. And then all of a sudden, when I started to orient all my mixes to be like, you know, the magic is going to be in the mid-range, then the mixes themselves started to sound good. But notice that it's not the magic's in the low end. There is magic in the low end. There's magic all over the place. But when you're talking about real instruments, rock instruments and country music and stuff like that, rock mixes and those types of mixes, the magic's in the mid-range. Now, if you're talking hip-hop or something else, it might be something else. Obviously, with a lot of these bands, they worship the low end. These studios have subs and stuff. I'm like, you mix with a sub? All right. So you see what I'm saying? That piece of information there was critical to actually getting to the next level. But it was the information that allowed me to make a critical choice about how I mix, rather than being like kind of spread out all over the place. It was like, focus your attention on making the magic happen in the mid-range. You know what I mean? And a year later, the magic happened. And that was just sticking with it and then developing the skill set over a year to go from, okay, somebody said something on the internet, to actually understand what that means, and I can do these things now in my mixes to enhance the mid-range to make it sound killer. You see what I'm saying? There's a whole trial and error process in there, me failing 600 times, mixing the same guitar parts over and over and over again, blah, blah, blah. You know, trying to find the right balance between drums, bass, and guitars, blah. It's all relative. And that's what a year took to get all the way from one to the next. But then once you start to understand, you're like, oh, there's this part of the drums, that's part of the mid-range. There's this part from the bass guitar. There's this part from the electric guitars, this part from the keyboard, this part from the vocals. It's not just one instrument. Now all of a sudden you got 5 or 6. And you got to blend all those mid-ranges together to get the magic. You see what I mean? It starts off with one sentence, but once you apply it to something else, it starts breaking down into much more detailed information that you can start to use as actionable. That's my point. So choices matter when you're starting to write music. Narrowing things down. You might be like, I want to write something from the 40s or the 80s. This is what I call the filter. Step 1, you're like, I'm going to write a song. That's usually what people say. That's what I say. Today I'm going to write a song, or tomorrow I'm writing a song. And then I just get to it. Stick to your guns. Don't say it and then not do it, because if you do that too many times, you'll just never do it. Don't be dishonest with yourself. If you're going to write a song, write the song, or write part of the song and then start working on it. You never know. I've started stuff like that and was like, this will be a failure. And it actually turned out to be a pretty awesome song. So you never know, right? Just force yourself to sit down, record the guitars or the bass, or lay down the drum tracks, or come up with the keyboards, or whatever it is, or develop the chord progression, whatever it takes. But be true to yourself and stay true to the process. It's just like practicing scales and arpeggios and the technical elements, or practicing along with other music and covers and stuff like that. Develop swing and feel and sort of, familiarity on the neck. Because a lot of songs use the same types of music functions. You start to recognize these moves. You're like, oh, I know immediately what they're going to do. You know what I mean? So that's pretty useful. And then there's this other prong over here, which is really one of the most important, which is writing your own music, because that forces you to take all of your skill sets, not somebody else's, not your internalization of their ideas, your ideas, with no guide rails, no training wheels, nothing. Sink or swim. Throw you right into the music ocean with no life jacket. and see how you do. We'll come back in 10 minutes. Tread water, bud. Right? And just get her done. But these choices, the filters and stuff like that, they narrow stuff down. You're going to do something from the 50s and 60s. You already kind of have an image mentally, if you will, of how that's going to sound. Right down to the production if you wanted to. You know, is it going to be the 80s? And that you can then start to choose what I call a genre, right? It's not just pop. Genre is like pop music, but like Billy Idol, which was huge, by the way. People seem to forget that. It's one of the best. It's funny to me because we absolutely mercilessly hated on this album when I was a kid. But when I was in my 20s, I was doing the Columbia House thing, where you get 7 CDs for a penny. Yes, those bastards hounded me for years afterwards because I got so many CDs from them. And I did actually pay most of it back. I think I only ended up getting a couple free ones. But Billy Idol happened to be one of those ones, right? So I was like, whatever, I'll listen to it. And it's an absolute masterpiece of an album. It's so good, man. There are no bad songs. And although I prefer the first side a little bit more, right up to about Flesh for Fantasy, the whole thing is just absolutely amazing. Amazing piece of music, right? So that's my point is once you start to filter and choose a genre, you'd be like, I'm going to kind of do it like a Billy Idol type thing from the 80s. But you could be like, I'm going to do a Billy Idol type thing, but then from the 60s. You see what I mean? Now all of a sudden you're forcing yourself to sit there and think about it. You're like, well, I can't just go with this crazy Steve Stevens chunk and sort of like straightforward, down picking, type idea. You're gonna have to find new ways of expressing this music, expressing those ideas, but that would try to capture the esprit of Billy Idol or whoever it is. But making a choice not only forces you to focus your energy in one direction, which will massively increase the probability that the song will get written and that you'll actually get something out of it, but there's a high probability as well that it'll come out sounding pretty decent too, because you always have some reference material. If you kind of get stuck, it's like, going to read the walkthrough on your video game. You're like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. Why did the game designers do it like this? That's stupid. Tell me I'm wrong, right? But there it is. So this is massively helpful because it limits the number of choices that you would normally have. You're not like, well, I don't know what I should be doing because you're just overwhelmed by the sheer number of choices. Now you're sort of being a lot more specific. And then you can be like, I can either do it in the 80s drum style. I could do it like the way Billy does it with like programmed drums, keeping it pretty straightforward and simple. I can get more advanced, maybe sort of mesh up some more, Rush type feel where the drums are more organic. They sort of fit the music more, you know what I mean? The music doesn't sort of just have to stay constrained to this very straightforward beat. Instead, it can kind of shift back and forth, morph, if you will. And again, this process of sort of mashing music together and sort of putting limitations on yourself and trying to, again, notice I don't just be like, write a song like Billy Idol. Maybe at the beginning you're doing that, but then you're trying to blend and incorporate other music styles that are going to fundamentally change what this would be perceived as. And in doing that, you actually come up with something newer. But you get my point. And this kind of creative process where you do it over and over and over again is the thing that basically builds you up as a songwriter and creates the unique entity that you'll become, or that you should be wanting to become. If you do too much of other people's music and stuff like that, you just become a clone. That's why you have to take multiple influences. But here's the thing, trying to take 2 or 3 bands can be too difficult. because there's just, again, too many options to consider. That's why in one instance, you're like, I'm going to use this filter. In another instance, you're like, I'm going to use this band and then I'm going to use this band. Or you might put two filters in there. You'd be like, I'm going to use this sort of writing style from the 60s, but I'm going to have a really tight, pristine production from the 2000s. And then I'm going to use this band or these two bands to sort of create the music tableau. And then just choose the best elements from those bands and line them all up on a grid and then sit down and start to write your music. When you're trying to come up with the chord progression, it'll make a lot more sense. If you're like, I want to write something like The Doors, is it like The End? Or is it like Break On Through to the Other Side? You know what I mean? Is it the extremes? Or what? Is it a happy song? Is it a sad song? You know, or like, who are you going to choose? Musically speaking, certain bands basically specialize in happy music. Other bands kind of specialize in moody and dark and sort of introspective music. You know what I mean? Take those two elements, try to blend them together. Maybe you have like night and day kind of situation. One part that's kind of happy and another part that's more moody. And find ways of blending them together. Now you see the entire sort of process being laid out. You need the guitar skills. You need the theoretical background to be able to mesh chords together, do transitions, cadences, modulations, chord progressions. Later on, of course, improvisations or full-on sort of devised lead lines or melodies. You're starting to combine all those elements together, and now you have, like, I guess you could say architecture authority, meaning you can capture those individual sound elements and then start building your cathedral. And that's really what you want to do, is start to organize your thoughts so that when you sit down, you kind of go through like a very brief 2 or 3 minute sort of, meditative process. And you're like, okay, try to set myself up exactly for who I want to sort of, use as inspiration. And then I wouldn't necessarily listen to their music because, of course, you don't want to predispose yourself, I guess, with respect to what's going on. But just be like, I was listening to, Take My Breath Away because I was watching Top Gun yesterday or something like that. And I really want to do this song. I want to kind of capture that atmosphere that Berlin had. You know what I mean? So what would be the first thing you do? You'd need to come up with that guitar line that goes da 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 da, right? So that's going to be job number one. If you were thinking about it. And then you'd be like, okay, after I wrote that down and I captured it and I broke it up into the appropriate bars and stuff like that, just with a click track, no drums. Then you're like, I need the accompaniment underneath it. So what's the harmonic structure that's going to go and support this melody line? And you're just like, okay, here's the first chord I'm going to use. Here's another chord. Okay, now I've got it going on here, right? You might even have done it simultaneously. You've been like, I'm going to start off with this E minor chord or something. I'm going to start off my thing playing it up here. And then I want to move to this, whatever, D7 chord and do this. I'm just throwing them together there, right? So I think you start to see the point here is just that by giving yourself both limitations and the power to make intelligent choices, you can actually collate a huge amount of information down to the most essential stuff. And then you get real forward momentum because you've kind of blocked out all the fluff and you're like, this is the most useful stuff I can use to create. You just take some elements and fuse them together. And the more you practice songwriting and things of that nature, the easier it gets just to take two things and just fuse them together almost instantaneously. And then it's just another skill set. Like when somebody's like, oh, can you do a sweeping sequence? You're like, sure, I can. And then they're like, can you write a song? And you're like, of course. And that's it. Choices. They can either rule over you or they can help you. It's like limitations. They can either rule over you or they can help you. When there's too many choices, you can use a limitation to sort of reduce that down to something that's manageable. A lot of times people just get overwhelmed by the sheer amount of choices, right? But limitations become negative when you're just like, you either become stubborn, you're like, I haven't played this thing perfectly, so I'm not ready to move on to the next level. That's a limitation that's dangerous. A limitation is oh, this information's not going to, I don't need to learn theory. That's another limitation. I was going to say something else, but that just makes it so much easier. I don't want to learn music theory because I don't think it's stupid. Let's just go full internet, right? That's a dangerous limitation. But being like, okay, of the entirety of the history of music, I want to write a song today. I think I want to narrow it down to the 70s. That's a useful limitation. Okay, done. Because I was listening to Barry Manilow, Mandy. Man, that intro, one of the greatest ever. You want to talk? Go listen to it for yourself. Barry Manilow, Mandy. Just the opening piano line. And then he gets into the singing line and stuff. The chorus doesn't really move me that much, but the verses are just absolute gold, man. And that's what I'm talking about. You can hear something like that, and that automatically puts about 100 songs into your mind that are very similar to that, like under Elton John and Michael McDonald and countless other artists like that. And there it is. By being like, I want to write something like that, you've already excluded like a huge portion of music, and you're like, I'm going to concentrate on this one thing. And once you get that down, now you have the foundation by which you can start adding all the extra stuff in, like the drums. Unless we're starting with the drums, and obviously we didn't. We started with the keyboards. And in my mind, when I did the keyboard thing, I was like, I want to do like an 80s sort of Knight Rider / Airwolf / Magnum PI kind of situation and just kind of play with these chords and make that work. I don't know how it's going to work, but that's my plan. So when I get to the drum section, I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to choose drum sounds and production value that allow me to create this vision in my mind to sort of best represent it. And there it is. I'm firing on all cylinders. And then when I get into the production realm, of course, I can then start to narrow down my focus to be like, well, these are going to be the most sensible drums. Use these experimental electronic drums. No. Look for like the more straightforward 80s hyper compressed ones. Yes. Job's done. I hope this lesson helps. I know there's a lot more information here than just on songwriting, but that's just it. This lesson on choices is going to be probably one of the most important ones you ever get that has nothing to do with music in and of itself, because this is one of the things that freed me. An excess of information can be devastating to your learning process because you just don't know what you should be doing. Don't put yourself in those positions by knowing when to use limitations, but then, of course, by using the limitation, keep yourself open to new options and new choices that would help you refine that limitation so that you just target the information that's absolutely essential for you to get to the next level, wherever that is, in whichever field, music, songwriting, production, or then promoting it after the fact if you're into that. Thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate every single one of you. We'll get into the drums on Thursday. No questions asked. I already have them punched up anyways, and yeah, I'll show you the production stuff. And then on Sunday, we're going to be getting into actually laying down the actual music tracks, and I'll show you step by step how to convert the SATB type mindset into how to arrange the instruments themselves. And boom, another insanely powerful tool that'll really help make your songwriting sessions pop and be a lot easier and way more productive, because now all of a sudden when you want to change something, you have to change one instrument, not an entire section. See you in the next one.